Gurave Namah. Om Gurave Namah. Om Gurave Namah. Hi everyone. This is a video looking at the chart of Russell Brand. Russell Brand is in the news currently because he is facing trial. He's facing trial in October on rape and sexual assault charges, which may land him in jail. And I think that this is an interesting point in time to study his chart and ask the question, is imprisonment in his future? Is he going to be imprisoned, or through the trial, will he be exonerated and set free? There are different techniques in Jyotish to study imprisonment. Obviously, the 12th house is very important because the 12th house is prison or retreat or cut off, solitude, and so on. And so the 12th house is important. But before we could do any serious analysis of his chart, we have a problem, which is that there is a debate about his birth time, and it's a significant difference in time. We're not just talking about 15 minutes here versus 15 minutes before versus 15 minutes later. So we're not talking about a question of one lagna over the next in the sequence. In fact, interestingly, so in his book, his first autobiography, he mentioned that he was born at midnight on June the 4th, 1975. He was born at midnight. Now, some people will immediately assume that what that means is he was born just a few moments or minutes after 12 a.m. on June the 4th. That means that, for example, his birth time could be 12:05 a.m. or 12:03 a.m. or 12:07 a.m. Then there's the other possibility is that he actually meant midnight at the end of the day. So that would mean, say, 11:58 p.m. on June the 4th or 11:55 p.m. on June the 4th. Now, is there a chance that he was born at midnight or around midnight on June the 4th at the end of the day, but actually, technically, he was actually born on June the 5th at just after midnight? Is that a possibility? Not likely. I think that whoever recorded his birthday, his birth date, June the 4th, would have been aware, would have made sure that the time was inside the correct day. So I'm assuming that June the 4th is the correct day. Even though he said I was born at midnight, I'm assuming the correct time is inside June the 4th, which means that it's either going to be a little bit after midnight at the start of the day of June 4th or a little bit before midnight at the end of the day on June the 4th. Now, if you look online, astro.com and other sites will show these two possible scenarios. Now, the interesting thing is when the time is exactly 24 or almost to the exact 24 hours later, the Lagna cycle, the Lagna point cycles through the zodiac and lands in approximately the same place. So here I have two charts. The top chart, if you look closely, the top chart is June the 4th, 1975, 5 minutes past midnight. Okay, so that's 5 minutes past midnight. And the chart beneath is June the 4th, 1975, and that is just a few minutes, 1 minute before midnight at the end of the day. So we're talking about 12:05 a.m., the first chart, and I have here at the bottom chart 11:59 p.m. So see what happens. The ascendant is almost at the same position because what's happened is at 12:05 it was at 4 degrees 41 Capricorn, and then throughout the course of the day went all the way around the zodiac, and then at roughly 11:59 p.m. it landed back in Capricorn at 3:58, 3 degrees 58. So almost to the exact, right? So we can't compare ascendants because this whether it was right after midnight in the morning or right before midnight at the end of the day, he is Capricorn. And I think that much is clear. I think it's clear that he is a Capricorn. He's not Sagittarius. He's definitely not Aquarius because the ascendant is very early Capricorn. So maybe Sagittarius, but not likely. It's most likely the case that he is a Capricorn, a Makara. And so we can't use that. Now, what's different, however, is a major shift in the moon because the moon um, every day travels 13 and some degrees. And so at 5 minutes past the hour, 5 minutes past midnight, the moon was at 11 degrees in Pisces, Mina, and then almost 24 hours later, the moon is 23, just 23 and 1 degree in Mina. So the nakshatra changes. So the nakshatra of the earlier time is Uttara Bhadrapada, and the nakshatra of the later time is Revati. Those nakshatras are back to back, they're next to each other. Revati is the last nakshatra in the zodiac, and Uttara Bhadrapada is the penultimate or the second to last. And so that's something that can be examined. And so we can look at the qualities of Uttara Bhadrapada and also the qualities of Revati. Now, I have looked into it a little bit and have found that there is some argument to be made for both nakshatras. But Revati is a more peaceful nakshatra. Uttara Bhadrapada is more has more I would say, intensity. And one thing that I have read consistently about Uttara Bhadrapada is that there may be, for males especially, an issue with sex addiction, drug addiction, which we all know, or you should know, that he does have because he's so extremely open about his past and so on. So um, so my 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 hunch is that he's actually the earlier time. So, this is still up for debate, but my hunch is that he is actually uh, at the earlier time. So when he said he was born at midnight, my take is that he was born maybe a few minutes past midnight in the early morning of June the 4th, 1975. So if that's the case, now see, why does that matter? Why does it matter that, oh, the moon is in Revati versus Uttarapadapada? Well, it changes the planetary periods entirely because every time we have a new nakshatra of the moon, the Vimshotri scheme changes. All the planetary dates change. So how are we going to predict if he's going to jail if we don't have the right dasha? And I'm using Vimshotri. There are other dashas out there that we could use, but I think that we can use Vimshotri. It's the main dasha, and the moon is very telling. The moon is our mind. The moon helps us understand our social standing, our social position, and he is going to be going to court, and he's also being scrutinized heavily in the court of public opinion, which is entirely the moon, right? And so that lunar fate is is upon him, and that's why I think Vimshotri works. But we do use a variation of Vimshotri, which is called Utpana, which is when the moon is either in the 3rd or the 11th from the Lagna. So in this case, the moon is in the 3rd house, and that's true for both charts. The moon is in the 3rd house. So we would use Utpana variation no matter which time we have, but the actual the ordering of the planets is the same, but the starting planet is going to be different if you are starting from Uttarabhadrapada, which ruling planet is Saturn. Therefore, the first um, well, in regular Vimshotri, the first planet is Saturn. With Utpanna, it shifts. So there's a calculation where there's a your starting planet is different. But with Revati, it's Mercury, and again with Utpana, it shifts. So there's a slight advanced technique looking at the variations, but the software can calculate it. And so this is what it looks like. These are the two schemes, right? If we take the earlier time, so let's say he was born early, then right now he's in a Jupiter period from 2012 to 2028. Before that was Rahu, right? After that is Saturn. So coming up after 2028 is Saturn. If we take the later time, so just a few minutes before midnight on June the 4th, then right now he is in a Saturn period, started in 2021 and is going until 2040. So this is our starting point. This is where we can start to explore the question, is he going to go to prison? So my belief is that the first time is the correct time. And if anybody wants to provide a counter argument, create a disputatious argument, that's absolutely welcome. And you can do so in the chat. You can provide your counter arguments for why you think the later time would be the correct time. So a few things, and I'm not going to say it all in this video. I'm going to create a second video with more detail, and we might even look at some compatibility questions with his marriages, well, at least for his first marriage, Katy Perry, because we have an accurate birth time for Katy Perry, and we have to see if it matches. It has to match. We should see a match in the marriage compatibility with D1 and D9 charts and so on. So that's coming up in another video, but I'm going to say a few words here and then I'm going to continue this discussion. It was very interesting that he and Katy Perry divorced 6 months before the end of Rahu Dasha. So he started Jupiter Dasha in December of 2012. They got divorced, and apparently he was the one that called the divorce. Um, she said that he did it by text, right? Not a very nice thing to do, but this is this is a very complex person. And also somebody who is a drug addict, a sex addict, has a lot of intensity in his personality. I'm not excusing that behavior at all, of course, but it's a very interesting person to study. So the point I'm making, though, is that he called off. He ended the marriage. He asked for divorce 6 months before the end of Rahu. So in I think it was August of 2012, and then by December of 2012 he moved to Jupiter. Now the way I interpret that is, and this is true. I think maybe you can reflect, you can look at your dashas and see if this is true, but that when we're on the precipice of a major dasha period change, we feel it. We feel something is coming. We feel some energy is shifting. We may not even know it consciously, but we know that we have to act. We have to do something different. So this is a interesting theory that he called off the marriage, or he divorced. He asked for divorce um, uh, as Jupiter was upon him, and that Jupiter was going to bring an entirely new energy than Rahu. Rahu, I mean, let's face it, this was his time of debauchery, drugs, sex, um, fame, everything like, that crazy period. And he talks about high levels of promiscuity. And so that rajas, we have to understand in the chart, where did that come from? Where did that high energy come from? And there are different aspects, right? There are different aspects that we can see. I mean, for example, this is a straight shot. The fact that there's a Rahu Venus mutual aspect by Rashi Drishti as well as Rahu's Graha Drishti on Venus. So during Venus period, Rahu had a full 100% Graha Drishti on Venus. So, Graha Drishti is desire. Rahu is desire. Venus is woman. So, maybe drugs. Rahu is also can pertain to drugs. So, but that in and of itself is going to show a tremendous amount of desire, and it makes sense that it happened in the Rahu period. Jupiter shifted. Jupiter shifted everything, and I'm not saying that Jupiter was a good period. It's clearly not, and it's still happening until 2028. So we have to study that. So why I think that he is in Jupiter period, and as opposed to Saturn. Now there is a theory that he's in Saturn period, okay, and some very highly esteemed Jyotishis are have have put forward some analysis of his of the writing on the assumption that actually he's in Saturn. Okay, he's in a Saturn period. I'm actually not there in my understanding. I'm still, maybe, we have to keep exploring, but this is very compelling. This fact of Jupiter starting in 2012 to 2028. um, the fact that Jupiter is in Marana Karakastana, so in MKS, in the third house. So anytime Jupiter is in the third house, it's in Marana Karakastana, which is a very difficult position. And one of the energies that it creates is your enemies come forward. There are enemies that come out of they come out of the woodwork in a way, and they come forward. Um, and that has happened over the course of these number of years. Slowly, for years, journalists have been working with the accusers in the rape trials. They have been working apparently, the journalists were the ones that did a lot of sleuthing and found out who these women were, and went and interviewed many, many women to try to find some women who would be willing to come forward, press charges, and so on. So the women themselves, on their own accord, didn't. Now, that's not a criticism towards the women, because, as we know, it can be very difficult to come forward, especially coming forward all on your own up against a famous celebrity with a lot of money and potential power and so on. So that is obviously something to take into account. But we also, at the same time, can't ignore the possibility that the journalists were also involved in supporting the women's understanding and reframing memories to a point where the women believed that it was rape or sexual assault. So this is the complication, and it's going to be he said, she said. There was no strong evidence. There's not going to be video footage or anything. So it's recounting stories and interpreting them, and then where's the legal threshold for rape? Because sex can be messy, it can be um, it can be inappropriate. Is that de facto illegal? So the legal boundaries is what will emerge, and there will be people on all sides that will have their opinions. People will say, he's absolutely guilty. Others will say this is, a witch hunt that, because he is an anti-establishment figure speaking out against the government and corporations that, they want to take him down, right? So there are these theories, there are these factions that will come up. But in any case, these enemies, and this is what Jupiter represents. Jupiter represents, because Jupiter is in Marana Karakastana, and it makes sense. In this scheme, the fact that Jupiter is, we're in the Jupiter period, what happens is the mind works in a way that, even subconsciously, so we're not even aware, but the mind and the social connections we have with people turn and enemies come forward. And but there's another complication, which is that Jupiter is in its own sign. Jupiter is in Swakshetra. MKS, very unhappy, very disturbed, very agitated in MKS, but in own sign. So that is a complication. That is, this is a hard thing to interpret when something is very good and very bad at the same time. Now, when a planet is in own sign, Svakshetra, we call it own sign, then there is like a feeling of ascending to the heavens. You're going to Svargaloka. We say the planet goes to Svargaloka. And so this planet, so Svargaloka can be like a spiritual awakening, a spirituality or a religiosity. It depends on who you are, your culture, and also other aspects of the chart. But that could be. So we also saw that, right? He's now become a born again Christian. He's become a devout Christian. Some will say it's all a ruse and he's just doing that for optics to try to improve his image. Others will say no, he's become a Christian because of all the hardships that he's had to endure. Um, and so those are theories, right? Those are theories, and they represent the factions of different schools of thought, different attitudes towards him, and so on. So Jupiter is in Svakshetra, which would explain. I'm of the affinity to think that it does explain his newfound religiosity. What happened? All of a sudden, one day, boom, he got baptized. Nobody even knew. And then from then on, he was just talking about Jesus and he just became a full on Christian. I mean, it's kind of a common trajectory for addicts to become Christians. It's not such a huge leap of understanding. There's a lot of people who suffered from all kinds of addictions, drugs, gambling, sex, and so on. And part of their recovery is going to some faith-based approach. Maybe they do meditation, maybe they join a Buddhist group, or in Russell's case, he's now a Christian, and seemingly very devout. I mean, he's not devout from birth, so he doesn't reflect that kind of sort of stereotype that we think of in terms of like a born and bred Christian. He's a born again Christian. So he has all of his past, messiness and dealings and all that, plus now this Christian. And some people don't accept that. So this is a complexity, but the point is that the Jupiter period, and we can go into the sub periods as well, because then you can really see differences. But the Jupiter period shows a combination of the MKS energy, Manakarakastana, as well as the Swakshetra energy activating. And not to mention that it is Lord of the 12th house, right? And so the 12th house is prison. So, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a smoking gun here that we're saying, absolutely no question that he's going to prison. But there is a 12th house connection. So Jupiter is in the 12th house. Sorry, Jupiter lords over the 12th house and the third house and is in the third house. And I'm just going to end with, one last comment here. There's so much more to say, and I'll do another video after this. But it's interesting, in his autobiography and in his storytelling, he talks about his father. And, you can you can sort of see patterns of behavior passing down through the generations. So, if we were to take the guru as, a planet that is of representing the father, the teacher, the boss, and so on, that energy is in the third house. And the third house is not a good house. It's not like a very good house. In some ways, it's not a good house. Gemini is the third sign that maps to the third house. And so, Gemini is like the brothel, and so the third house carries with it like Rajasic sexual energy. That's not sexual energy wrapped in mature relationship. It is the sexual energy of like an adolescent. And that's why Mithuna, which is the Sanskrit word for Gemini, actually translates to copulation. So that's the third sign, and the third house also has that kind of imprint. So when Jupiter is in the third house, it's like the father having to go to the brothel, or the teacher or the priest. That's why Jupiter is in MKS because in the third house. Because imagine if the religious priest who is regularly most comfortable in the ninth house goes to the third house, they have to go from the temple. The ninth house is the temple, and they have to cross the city and go cross the land and go to the city and go to the brothel and sit in the brothel, and they feel very humiliated, very angry, and people are angry at that person. People are angry at the guru for doing that because it's a violation. Now, what was interesting in his autobiography, he said that he had a very strange relationship with his father, and his father took him to brothels when he was a child. They went to Thailand, and his father would introduce him to prostitutes and, try to engage him in sexual activity early on, or start thinking about sexual activity early on. That can also explain this excessive promiscuity. So we wonder, like, what caused this promiscuity? And I've already shown you this very powerful Rahu Venus conjunction, but also Jupiter in the third house with Mars, that could also cause this. It could exacerbate it. It can exacerbate it. Once you get to Mercury, and this is beyond this video, I have to stop here, but I can speak about this later. Mercury is combust, and that's actually a good thing, because the combustion of mercury helps create restraint. Without that, you could end up a lifelong addict. And he's not. He's blessed by the fact that he was able to recover. That is a huge victory, especially given the pressures of fame and so on. So mercury combust is a very good thing, because the combustion, so the proximity of Mercury to the sun allows Mercury to settle down and follow orders and not be this child misbehaving all the time, even though it is Atmakaraka and retrograde. So the retrograde creates strong desire, and strong desire to try and try again and make mistakes and so on. But the fact of its proximity to the sun is a huge blessing for Russell Brand, who has all these addiction qualities. So this concludes my first video. I have so much more to say, and there's so much more to explore, but I will save that for another